Hello, everyone. How are you doing? So, as you know, it's spring. It's a time of renewal. It's sunny. It's bright. The trees are flowering. The tulips are up. It's a time, as I said, of hope and renewal, and it's really fitting then that the bencher election happened in the spring because we have a new bench and we have a lot of new people. And I'm going to take you through. If you have any questions, just let me know, and I'm happy to stop and answer whatever they are. So let's get started. So I guess I'd start by saying that one of the things that I do myself when I start a case is that I like to know who I'm dealing with. I like to know who the judge is. I like to know defense counsel. I like to know, and I'm not talking I do Google searches or anything like that, or Facebook or anything. I don't do anything like that. But I do go on, say, Quick Law or Canly or other databases to see what I can find out about people in that way, sort of in the legal perspective, not in the personal perspective at all, but just to give me an understanding of what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of an understanding about the people who are at the table. So on a very high level, I'm the former treasurer. So I was the treasurer for 2 years, and I finished in June. And as the treasurer, I was the head of the Law Society. So when I was doing it, 58,000 lawyers and 10,000 paralegals. I think we're a little bit more than that now. So my job was as the president or head of the Law Society. And the Law Society is, we're permitted to self-regulate through the Law Society Act. We're permitted to govern the affairs, to regulate legal services and the practice of law in Ontario. And we do that through elected people who are composed convocation. And convocation is made up of 53 people who are voting members. I'm only going to talk about the voting members. There are other members. For example, I can go back to convocation as a former treasurer, but these are the voting members. So we have 8 lay benchers. They're appointed by the Attorney General. They're non-lawyers and non-paralegals. We have 5 elected paralegal benchers and 40 elected lawyer benchers. So that composes our 53 members. And we are required to regulate in the public interest. And we are provided with support and guidance and a much more diverse perspective because we are assisted and joined at the table by lay members. So I'm going to start by telling you about our lay members. So I told you on the last slide we had 8, but if you can count those up, you'll see that there's only 7. So we had 8 lay benchers as of last June. At the end of my term, Nancy Lockhart resigned, and we're still waiting for her position to be replaced. The lay benchers that you see here, they are appointed for a 4-year term, so their terms are coming up. I don't know what will happen about whether all of them will be reappointed and whether we're going to get our 8th lay bencher or not. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of these people. So Catherine Banning is the most recent lay bencher who was appointed. And she is from the north, and it's really exciting to have a bencher who brings her perspectives to the table. She's a band member of Fort William First Nation, and she has a background in finances. And she just is a really engaged and active and thoughtful bencher, so we're so lucky to have her at the table. We also have Seymour Epstein. So Seymour has been a lay bencher, so you can see for almost 25 years, he's been there for a long time. And you can see that he's got a real entrepreneur and business background. We have Dr. Benson Lau as well, who's a family doctor and active. He was appointed in 2019. And when he was appointed with Geneviève Pinchot, Claire Sellers, and Nancy Lockhart. So Geneviève Pinchot is from Ottawa. She's bilingual and has done a lot of volunteer work and again brings a really important perspective to our work. Claire Sellers has a background with the Sick Kids Foundation. She, as well, is on the board of Law Pro. She's one of the Law Society's representatives on Law Pro. We have Jerry Sheff, who's been there for a long time, not quite as long as Seymour, but he's been with the Law Society for a long time as well, and brings an extensive financial and business background to the table. And then we have Doug Wellman, who's the president of Wellman Financial, has a background in insurance as well. And he's really, since he started in 2019, really actively engaged the role at the Law Society and is quite engaged to the point where he was one of the co-chairs of the Access to Justice Committee and helped steer the Family Legal Services Provider license. So those are the lay benchers. Yep.
Is near 50 years, and I guess it's the appointment by the Attorney General, so you can't speak to this, but is there any effort to diversify the lay benchers in terms of being more reflective of Ontario's diversity?
Absolutely, and that's why we're thrilled during my term to have Kathy Banning appointed from Fort William First Nation to bring her own perspectives or financial perspectives, but also from the north. The northern perspective and Indigenous. So yes, but as you said, the appointments are by the Attorney General. So we're going to talk on the next panel about influencing decision makers. So maybe we'll sort of talk about some of those strategies then. But that's really something that we can make suggestions for, but we don't control. Then we have paralegal benchers. We got 5 paralegal benchers and only 1 returning. That's Michelle Lamazzo. Michelle has been running her own practice for, 33 years, and she does WSIB work. She's out of Windsor. And we have 4 new ones. 2 the members of the CCLA. Paula Callahan will be very well known. She's won an award from the CCLA. She's also on the board of directors. She's a trustee with them. We have also then Demetra, Deborah and Mike, and you can see from the slide that they bring different perspectives. They're not all in the same practice area. Michelle, so we have one in Ottawa, one in Windsor, Deborah's in Toronto, Demetra's near Toronto, and Mike is in London. So you can see that we are, and it's different. That's a little bit different than our last time. Lawyers are elected regionally, paralegals are not. So we could have all our paralegals in one area, but we'll see that we've got Toronto, Ottawa, and London. So that's great. And Deborah, who is now a paralegal, she's also on the Legal Aid Board. She's one of the Law Society nominated. We make recommendations to the Attorney General. The Attorney General makes the appointment. So. And you'll also see that she's the co-founder of the Ontario Association of Black Paralegals. So we have 4 new people who there will be, like all of the new benchers, there will be orientation and learning, but it's an exciting time for all the new people at the table. So this is just going to be a quick little lesson on how the Law Society works in terms of our election. So you'll see the asterisk behind the name Regional Benchers, because we ensure that there's regional representation at the table, and that's really important. I should have started by introducing myself. Yeah, I'm the former treasurer, but I'm also a member of the Huron Law Association, and a proud member, I might add. And I might just say that in the last bencher election, the Huron Law Association had the highest voter turnout of any law association. And I went to their annual general meeting and I said, let's see if we can get 100%. So I can hardly wait till the bencher numbers come out. And maybe for the next round, to encourage people to vote, we could have a little inter-county competition to see who can get those numbers up. Now, we only have about 60 members. So I think we've got a lot easier job. than some of you do. But anyhow, so we can talk about that for next time. Okay, so I just want to give you sort of the intel on regional benchers. So you will have all seen this, I think. And you'll see that there are some benchers who have a star beside their name. Okay? That doesn't mean that they're better than anyone else or that they get more recognition. What it means is that they have a special place in terms of being the regional bencher. So Catherine Whitehead, Andrew Spurgeon, Jennifer Gold, Mitch Kitagawa, Joelle Millette, Cheryl Saran, and Greg Monfortin. And this is really important. It's important to you and your associations to know that you at least have one bencher from your region who's at the table. And it may be more. So if we look at London, I think London maybe has 4 or 5. I'm going to go through that. But this is important. And you will always have someone from your region, assuming there were benchers who were people who ran from that region. So let's just go and see what this means. So it means that it's the person who had the most votes in the region, from the region. So it's in the Southwest, it's the person who got the most Southwest region votes. It's not the most votes overall. So why is this important and why am I telling you? Because it affects who's next in line. It affects our succession planning, and I'm going to show you how it does that. So in Toronto, you just go down the list to figure out who's next or who gets replaced next. Outside of Toronto, though, you don't do that. And I'm going to give you an example. So I'm going to use the Northwest with Cheryl Saran and Etienne Esquega. You will see that Etienne Esquega, at the top line, received 1,436 votes. He finished 43rd outside of Toronto. But if you look at the bottom part of the slide tells you this is from the Northwest. So these are votes from the Northwest. It was Cheryl Saran got 138 votes, and Etienne Esquega got 123 votes. So if we go back to this slide, I don't even know if I can do that, but hey, there, worked. If we go back to this slide, or actually this slide, you'll see that Cheryl Saran is the Northwest rep. So say she couldn't complete her term. She gets appointed, she gets another job opportunity like Orlando Da Silva did, where he couldn't continue to be a bencher in the last term. For whatever reason that she can't continue, she would be replaced by the next, because she's the regional bencher, she'd be replaced by the person who got the next highest votes in that region, be Etienne Esquega. So he would get elected even though he finished 43rd, because it's important to ensure that we have regional representation. So what does this all mean? So in Toronto, we had one of our people that I'm going to tell you about, and I didn't change my slide presentation for it, but I don't know if you heard that Julia Shindoy is now Justice Shindoy. So she was one of the 40 lawyer benchers who got appointed. She won't be a bencher, so she won't start the term. And so what happens? We go down the list to figure out who's next. Howard Levitt is next. So Howard Levitt will take the place of Julia Shindoy. And that's because Julia Shindoy is a Toronto bencher. And for the Toronto bencher, we go down the list to figure out who's next. So I'm going to come back to that when I tell you about what else is happening at the Law Society. So we don't have a lot of returning benchers from the last term. We have, as you can see here, a number from inside Toronto and 4 from outside Toronto. So I just want to give you a little bit about who they are. So Julia, top of the list, she just got appointed, so she will not be at the table. But she came from Metropolitan University and she was involved in a lot of diversity organizations, starting them up. It's a loss for us not to have Julie at the table, but she's moved on to something even better, so good for her. We have Atricia Lewis. I think that Atricia may have spoken to you before at FOLA. Atricia's a second-term bencher, and she's just a really thoughtful, engaged bencher, and she brings so much to the table. We have Isfahan, who's doing her 3rd term. She is in government, We have Jonathan Rosenthal, who's a sole practitioner in criminal law. Megan Shortreed, who's at Pallier Roland, and she has a varied practice, but also a lot of work in regulation. We have Sid Troyster, who I think many of you know. It seems that Sid's probably our most well-known bencher because of all his work he does in real estate, and apparently he's the guru of the Planning Act. So Sid's returning, third-term bencher as well. And then we have Tanya, who does corporate and commercial. She runs a small firm in Toronto. So those are the people who are back from the last bench from inside Toronto. Outside Toronto, we only have 4. We have the treasurer, who brings her perspective from working in Windsor, but she also has a practice in Toronto, so she brings both of those. We have Quinn Ross, and so Quinn's from Goderich, like I am. He's another proud member of the Huron Law Association. Cheryl Saran, who's in Kenora, who has a practice focused generally on construction, real estate, and estates. And then we have Andrew Spurgeon, who's from Hamilton, and a mediator and adjudicator. So those are the people who have at least 4 years of experience. We are also joined, though, by 4 benchers who who didn't get elected in 2019, but came back, and they did get elected. So we have that extra experience to add to the table as well, to add to the mix. So it's going to be kind of interesting because they've been out of it for 4 years. So they will have a learning curve as well, but they also bring to us some history. I think John's on his 3rd term, Peter's on his 3rd term, and Will's on his 3rd term. So that brings to us some experience, which is going to be interesting and exciting as well. And you can see their practice areas. John's at Gowlings. Rebecca has really a regulatory practice, and she brings a lot of wisdom and insight about regulation, which is what we are. We're a legal regulator. So it's really great to have Rebecca back at the table as well. And you can see Will with his public law and commercial litigation, and Peter Wardle with his varied practice as well. What about the new people? Well, we've got, as you know, lots of new people, and we'll start with Gerald. So Gerald is at Stockwood, so these are all the Toronto people, criminal, constitutional, administrative. Anna Maria works in a criminal firm. Heather does family law. Pam comes to us as the executive director of LEAF. Shalini, exciting for us as well to bring the perspective of clinics and the legal aid work, which is a really important voice to have at the table. Stephen Rothstein has a background in the Ontario Securities Commission. Mark Searchin does business law at Goodman's. And Marg Waddell does commercial litigation and class actions. So that's the inside Toronto bunch. There's a lot more from outside of Toronto. So we have Neha, who runs a small practice in Cornwall, mainly in criminal law. Laura Emmett, who does insurance defense from Waterloo. Jennifer Gold, family law in Brampton. Karen Yulin, personal injury in London. Yasminka, she comes to us from university, so we get the law school perspective as well. Mitch in insurance defense in Ottawa. Joelle from Timmins, and she's bilingual, which is also really important that we have both official languages represented at our table. And Kathy, who also has a regulatory background. But we're not done, because there's lots more of new benchers outside Toronto. So we have Greg who does injury law in Windsor, Sonia from the University of Ottawa's Community Legal Clinic, again a really important voice at the table, and she's bilingual. Natalia from Ottawa, Kevin, he's from Learners in London. Stephanie Sutherland does condominium and multi-residential advice. She's from Kitchener. Catherine Whitehead, who I think most of you know. Is Catherine here? I think she was the head of Barrie or Simcoe County Law Association. So Matthew Wilson, real estate in London, and Mike Winward, civil litigation. So part of our responsibilities as benchers is to have ensure that we have varied perspectives at the table. And I think that you can see from the different practice areas, the different locations that, that we're representing. We have a varied representation, abilities and skills and backgrounds that are going to be at Convocation for these next 4 years. And here, in just a summary of, and you know what? You know who I missed? Okay, Catherine Rhinelander. She's a crown like me, and I skipped right over her. Okay, nobody tell her that. And let's excise this from the recording, okay? I'm like, I didn't say Catherine, because I looked down that list and it said crown. Okay, let's nobody tell her that. So Catherine's with the Guns and Gangs unit. She's Indigenous, and she's just fantastic. So again, a really important voice to have at the table. So let's just skip right over that and go back to the summary of practice areas. And they're also leaders. The people who were elected are leaders in their organizations. They've started organizations, diversity organizations. They've led diversity organizations. They've led the Canadian Bar Association and the other organizations that we have here. So I go back to where I started. It's an exciting time at the Law Society. It's a time of renewal. And as we start with a new bench and start to think about all the things that we have to do as a legal regulator. So I'm going to give you this quick overview about our structure. And I am going to just do it in a really high level because I think it's going to tie into our next panel. So the treasurer is elected or acclaimed. So Treasurer Horvat is finishing her first term. Her first term will finish at the end of June, and I expect she will be acclaimed for her second term. So that will happen like within the next week or so. There'll be nominations for treasurer, and only benchers can vote for the treasurer. So we then have committees. So I'm the former treasurer. I can go to convocation, but I am no longer on a committee. So this is our committee structure, and it is populated by benchers. Other people could be appointed in certain circumstances to certain committees or task forces if we needed a varied perspective at the table. These are some of the committees that we have, and here's a lot more. Some of them go to our core business, professional development and competence, and I see Priya, the head of that, the head of the executive director of PD&C. Is that your official title, executive director? Yep. Professional regulation. So these are all the committees. And some of them are statutory, some of them are bylaw committees, and some of them are set up by the treasurer. Really depends on what's going on. So for example, when I was treasurer, competence was something that I wanted to focus on, and with Priya's fantastic team, we did a competence task force report that FOLA participated in. So what's next? What's the next thing that's going to happen at the Law Society? We're going to have Jacqueline Horvat, I believe, acclaimed as the treasurer for the next year. Orientation started yesterday, so the new benchers went into the Law Society and they started to understand what we do and what we don't do. We are a legal regulator. We don't control the courts. We're not in charge of delay in the courts. We may do things that improve access to justice, so indirectly do some of that work, but we are a legal regulator. We're not an advocacy organization. We're not like FOLA. We're not like the OBA. We're not out there advocating for lawyers and paralegals. We're a public interest regulator. So it's important in orientation that everybody understands what their role is and what it is why they're at the table and what their job is. We'll have May convocation. I don't think that there will be much on May convocation because there's a lot of work now to bring people up to speed, to bring this group together as benchers who understand what their role is. Committee meetings will be in June. They're usually monthly except for the summer. And that's where they do the business work about, what they're engaged in that will result in reports going on to convocation. And then in September, we have a strategic plan. And that strategic plan will bring all the benchers together, the existing benchers, the 53, plus people like me, and other former treasurers, life benchers, to plan what are the next 4 years going to look like. So with the treasurer's election, what happens? Treasurer Horvat was an elected bencher. She ran for bencher and she got elected. As soon as she gets acclaimed as the treasurer, another spot opens up. So what will happen? Treasurer Horvat is not the regional bencher. There's no asterisk beside her name. So we go down the list and we look. The next person who will come is Ryan Alford, who will come. He's from the north, from the northwest. So Ryan will take a seat at the table when the treasurer is acclaimed, and that will happen in June. Or I guess it could happen sooner, depending on if there's an acclamation. So here's our strategic plan from last time. This is what we were looking at over the 4-year term. Proportionate regulation, scope of regulation, competence and quality of service, and access to justice. So we will engage in that same strategic planning framework in September to set the course of the next 4 years. So I think that's a really exciting time too, when we start to think, for me, what I'm really excited about is thinking forward about what's happening to the provision of legal services and the practice of law. How are things like ChatGPT, or how is regulation and what's happening to regulation out in BC, how are these things going to impact on us and how the regulation of the legal services and the legal profession in Ontario? So it's an exciting time to think about what's happening out there and to try to focus our work over the next 4 years, because everything will flow from that. So my tips for you, and we're going to get into this on the next panel, but my tips for you are get to know the benchers. I've given you a very, very brief introduction, but get to know them, whether it's because they're in your location, whether it's because they're in your practice area, whether you're interested in them because, Deborah started the Ontario Association of Black Paralegals and you want to know more about starting an organization. Whatever it is that draws you to one of the benchers, get to know them, reach out to them, connect to them. They need to know what's happening as well. It brings more diverse perspectives to our table in terms of our decision making, and it makes our decision making richer. So, and there's a lot of things that are important to you that are really important to us, and so I really encourage you to have a voice. Yep. Sure. You mean before we do it? So the question, I don't know if you heard, is whether there's an opportunity for organizations to comment on the strategic plan.
For example, I work for the Ontario Securities Commission. They publish a draft strategic plan, a statement of priorities, and advocacy groups can, of course it's a very different organization, but can actually comment on the proposed strategic plan going forward. Is there any type of, back and forth?
So I'm going to say no. Let's move on. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to say no, not directly, but I think that there actually is a way. I think at the outset, you all know now, because I told you that we're doing our strategic plan. It's in our governance practices too. We do it every 4 years. It will go to the strategic planning committee, and it will be published as part of convocation, but I don't believe that we do the draft. I don't think that that's sent out. But I think as the head of the Toronto Lawyers Association, the head of FOLA, you heads of your organizations, that if there's something that's of interest to you, like sort of the big picture, that you have an opportunity to say, I understand you're doing your strategic plan, it's coming up. Our input is that we think this is an area that we would benefit from. So I think there is a role, but for me to say we're going to come back to you and ask is it 46 law associations? We're going to ask all the law associations plus all the other legal organizations to comment on our work. I think it would grind it to a halt. But I think front-end loading, I think there's an opportunity there. Okay, and then these are my tips. Advocacy. You're stronger together than individually. You have a real voice, and we've really seen that in what happened in the turnaround with funding of the law associations through LEARN, and how your advocacy as FOLA, but also individually, how it really made a difference and turned that around. Stay informed. I went to a group and somebody asked me a question, and they said, like, you know, why did this happen? And I said, because that organization was involved. They watched convocation. They knew what was going on. They were at the table literally with us. They had a front row seat to what was happening. So I encourage you to do that as well. Respond to calls for comment. I know you do. It's just really important that you continue to, and participate. So I'm going to stop because, oh yeah, and read the licensee update. The licensee update comes to your inbox at the last Thursday of the month. That's from Sheena's department. And it's a great way to stay connected and know what's going on. So I'm going to stop there because we're going to move, I think, to our next panel.